Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are tuning into us from. Here in Dublin, it's the afternoon / heading into the evening already. And my lovely guest on the podcast this week was Aden Nepom, and she's based in the Pacific Standard Time. So she's about 8 hours behind.
Yeah, I'm having my morning coffee.
There you go. Welcome to this week's LinkedIn Live, Aden. Would you like to tell people a little bit about yourself and what we spoke about on the podcast?
Yeah. Well, hello, I'm Aden Nepom. I am president of The Art of Change. I'm a senior facilitator at On Your Feet Improv for Business, and I'm the host of the Changed podcast. And I come from a unique background of communication tools, having worked in software. I have all these interesting experiences, but I think people get really intrigued with my work in the world of improvisation. So we talked a lot about what it takes to have people collaborate really effectively, what kind of listening skills leaders need, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it was really great. And I think one way I would describe the conversation was it was really high energy. I really enjoyed that. And we had a little bit of let's call it a little bit of a snafu in that the software that I was using, I wasn't sure if it fully recorded. I think my story of my life with my Apple Mac is that it's constantly full, and so it didn't download properly. But thankfully, we didn't have to re-record the podcast, which has happened, by the way, in the past, where I've either lost something or it hasn't saved properly or something like that. Because limited space on my old Mac, but I still love it.
I mean, I think for listeners, it's like a magic trick anyway, right? It's like listeners are like, you recorded all of these things and it's beautiful and I'm listening to it, and they don't worry about like how many times did you have to record, or what did you edit, or did you make cuts? Is this the whole thing? And as a fellow podcaster, you and I were like, this is a new tool. Let's use it and let's throw caution to the wind. And I'm glad we did. And I'm also glad that we didn't have to re-record, though I was definitely fully prepared to re-record.
We've gone off topic slightly, but I do like having this conversation because I think if you don't have a podcast, you probably don't get the amount of work that is involved. And up until very recently, I did everything on the podcast. I edited it all. I admittedly pretty much a one-take wonder. I won't re-record stuff generally. So if I'm speaking into the mic, I might have to edit out bits, ums and ahs, and pause, things like that. Or if I've said the wrong word, then I'll change the word up or something like that. Generally speaking, I am a one-take wonder, which maybe is good because I go live quite often these days, and it's no qualms to just get on and do it. So you don't even have to think about re-recording when you go live. So that's good.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to, sorry, did you want to add something?
Well, I was going to do what you're about to do, which was connect the dots, really, because to me, the conversations, even though they seem unrelated, could very well be related because, it's that finding that balance of vulnerability and expertise and commanding that expertise, that being present in the moment, but thinking ahead. It's that weird combination that goes into podcasting as it does into leading, as it does into having really healthy team dynamics. So even though the two topics are unrelated, there is a relationship there. There's a reason our brains went that way, I think.
There is a reason to the madness, I think, is what but great. Do you have any more of, I suppose, like we talked about some very practical tips. I always like to keep things really practical on the podcast. So, like rather than just listening, and this is, probably reflective of my own life where I love to read and I love listening to podcasts, but it's about, well, what action can I take? What am I going to do differently as a result of listening to this? What am I going to do differently as a result of reading this book? I'm very guilty, books especially, read them, I know it all, but then like how do I suppose what I'm trying to say is where I neglect to do is like what action can I take on the back of this? And I talk about it a lot on the podcast and in other places about the knowing doing gap. But what kind of practical suggestions would you like to highlight to people, I suppose, if they want to improve, if they want to become more effective communicators?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like everyone in the work that I do, in the realm of work that I do, everyone is saying basically the same thing, which is leaders, you need to build trust with the people that you lead. You do that by learning to listen well, which is different than like you really have to digest what people are saying and be really present to do that. And those things, building trust and listening well, among other things, they take practice. So this assumption that I've been told a good listener, so I am, it's great to be told you're a good listener, but it's a practice. You got to keep practicing, because you could easily slip into taking it for granted, and then you're immediately a terrible listener all over again.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting. Interestingly, that concept of practice has come up quite a bit on things that I'm reading or listening to, and maybe I can relate it then to this concept of there's no destination. You're not going to ultimately reach a place where you're successful, where you reach a place. One thing that really springs to mind is I'm reading at the moment How to Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty, which is a really incredible book. I really enjoy it. And if anyone wants to know more about the books that I read, I do have Aoife's reading list on my website. So Happier at Work website, and I do have a reading list. There's only, I think, 5 books there at the moment. But I have a ton of other books that I've summarized, and I'm just waiting to kind of get them uploaded onto the website. But that is one that I will add. And so coming back to what he speaks about, and it's in particular reference to the ego, or the false ego, the false self, and the ego. And what he says about it is, you don't reach a stage where suddenly you just have no ego, or you kind of shed it. So
right.
It's a continuous journey. You need to practice it and practice it and practice it and keep doing it. So it ties in nicely with what you're saying. And that has come up, like I mentioned, on a few different, I can't recall exactly the other area, but the one in relation to the ego is something that really stuck in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really struck by books that remind us that things are constantly moving, that we are constantly being reborn and reshaped. So, and that we can dial down our certainty a little bit. I'm always really interested in those concepts. So the book, The Righteous Mind, is a really nice read if you haven't read that one yet. And something that we talked about on your show is this is a passion point for me at the moment, which is this idea of engaging in reason so that we can have difficult discussions with each other, so that we can tackle these polarizing issues and depolarize them, recognize where we're the same in our differing interpretations, and then think about ways together to get on the same side of the table to come up with resolutions. And to that end, as I mentioned on your show, and I'll mention it here, I am teaching. This month is the last month I'm doing this for free, but I've been running these workshops called Reason in an Outraged World. I will continue to offer them, but what I'm finding is that there's so much out there. I really want people to take this seriously. I want people to take this content. I want them to use it. I want them to implement it. I think it's helpful in having these difficult engagements, which is critical as a leader. It's critical as a collaborator at work. And it's critical in the real world. You want to keep your friends and family in your life. You need to be able to have difficult conversations. So I'll put a link below if people are interested in that. I'm doing one today. And even though this is a LinkedIn Live, I recognize, you may be watching this a week after we recorded it. So there's another one at the end of the month. So I'll put a link to just everything that I have going on, so you can register for the one that you want to. But they're both available for free. You're welcome to pay for them if that's what you're excited to do. There's an option to do that, but you can take these for free this month. So, but even if you didn't want to do that, even if you're like, free is too expensive because time is money. There's, I put a Medium article up months ago called How to Have a Reasonable Conversation with Somebody Even When You Disagree with Them. I'm really into long titles. If you were on my show and you know that I played a game called Aden Asks You a Bunch of Questions and you try to answer them as quickly as possible. So I'm really into long, specific titles. But there's this piece up on Medium.
I must say, I think my answers were probably somewhat longer than just one word or one sentence as well. I think I explained it a little bit too much, but that's for another day.
That's when it comes to clarity, you can only do so much. We want brevity. We love brevity. We value brevity, but clarity requires specificity. So there's this weird balance that we have to strike between finding an economy of words, but also finding the words that describe the thing. So I put out a piece called How to Have a Reasonable Conversation with People Even When You Disagree with Them. And it's up on Medium and you can read that. And there's a downloadable like tips and tricks thing. So even if you didn't want to spend an hour and a half in a free workshop getting practice in these skills that you can take and immediately use, there's still this free resources because I just want people to be able to engage in more productive conversation. It's really, to me, it's turned out to be just like the most important thing.
And it's funny, what you're saying there reminds me again of another book, Getting to Yes, and that's all about negotiation.
Yeah.
And it's, the two sides of the story and focusing on what you both want as an outcome rather than where you're coming from as a stance or what you stand for. So I thought that was quite interesting. And the podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts. If you haven't listened to it yet, it's got over 200 listens at this stage, which is incredible for it's only out since Friday. So podcast listens have certainly increased in the last little while. So thank you for your ongoing support. And I just found out last night, actually, that I was shortlisted for Podcast of the Year with the Digital Women. So I'm absolutely thrilled about that. Yes.
Congratulations, Aoife. That's wonderful.
Yes. Yeah. I oftentimes don't recognize myself or take time to recognize myself, but I am definitely taking time to appreciate this and to say thanks for all the listeners, because if it wasn't for people listening to the podcast, then I wouldn't be making it. And you know yourself as a podcast creator that it takes an awful lot of effort, and you don't often get the feedback, or you don't hear what people are thinking or doing or changing as a result of listening to it. And it makes it hard. So even if someone just says, thank you, really enjoy the show, it absolutely makes my week. And I've had a few of those this week, actually, which I am going to share and meaning to share on LinkedIn. Just a simple thing like, I just recently discovered your podcast and I love it. And I'm sorry, I'll stop droning on about the podcast.
I think it's wonderful
to share. But any other kind of tips? I know you had some 4 kind of practical areas about being people's being recognized and appreciated. So looking at things from people's perspective or the reason that they actually do things. So do you want to kind of outline a few of those, because I thought they were very interesting, in particular, the kind of 4 practical things, like thinking about the intention, I think, isn't it? Like, what is someone's intention?
I think what you're talking about is listening for what people care about, which is something that gets covered in the workshop. And it's a tool, there are ways to do that. There are lots of really great listening techniques. Listening for specific information, listening for motivation, and listening for what people care about. Those are ways to listen for information beyond our typical way of listening, which is listening for when it's my turn, listening for where you're wrong, or listening for the problem that I think you want me to solve for you. Because what we know about those 3 default listening approaches is we didn't have to work hard to polish those techniques. They're sort of automatic. However, they don't necessarily accomplish the good intent behind what we're doing. People listen for their turn, because they're trying to be relatable. So it's like, oh, I'm so glad you told me that story so that I can now make it about me. Here's a story that's totally like your story, but now it's my story. Aren't we the same? So there's a good intent there, but actually you're stealing the mic from the person who's really just trying to actually connect. And the same is true for people who are trying to solve problems when they're listening. Sometimes people don't actually want their problem solved. And there's this terrible consequence of that great intent, which is if you're jumping in to solve a problem before you know what the problem is, then you're really like, you're making that person feel completely unheard. You're giving something that's completely not helpful. And it can lead to all kinds of confusion and a lack of wanting to connect in the future. So there's consequences, and I could go on and on about that. But listening for what people care about, speaking to their good intent is incredibly powerful. And what's so cool about it, and I talk about this in the workshop and you get practice doing it, is when you speak to someone's good intent, even if it's not their actual good intent, like you can make it up as long as it comes from this place of having listened for it and taking your best guess and then framing it as a guess. You can build relationship, build connection, and actually find out what people really do care about. So if I'm listening and I say, it sounds like, based on what I'm hearing, it sounds like, or I think that you care about, whatever it is, and you fill in a really good intent, not some sort of like round the back stabby. Sounds good, but it's really not good. Right. Like, sounds like you really care about everyone dying because they're stupid. Like, all of a sudden it's no longer helpful. It sounds like you really care about justice, or it sounds like you really care about health, or it sounds like you really care about getting this done on time and prioritizing correctly. Whether or not those are the actual intent of the person, people love to feel like a hero. So by talking to that good intent, people go, oh yeah, I do care about that, which is really cool. Or they're like, actually, it's not about justice so much as fairness. I think that's the example I used on the podcast, justice versus fairness, which are different. But nobody's going to say justice is a bad value or whatever. It's like just that simple act of trying to see the awesomeness, the motivation, the intent behind what people do versus what negative thing you think they might be doing. It's a game changer. It's the literal opposite of what people have been doing on social media for the last, I want to say year, but let's be honest, it's been more than that. It's maybe 4-5 years. The people have been doing this thing where they're like, if you think this, or if you say that, then you must be this kind of terrible person who also thinks this horrible thing. So it's literally just do the opposite of that. Have better conversations by doing the opposite of that. It's helpful. And if you really want to persuade people to help them see your point of view down the line, you have to show that you care about seeing their point of view as well. It's unfair to assume that people want to hear your point of view, but that because it's the best, but that you don't have to reciprocate. Like that's ridiculous.
This is it. So thank you for anyone who's listening live today. Thank you so much for tuning in live. If you're catching the replay or if you're listening in live, feel free to add in questions below. And both myself and Aden will see the comments as they come up, so we'll be able to respond to them then. Podcast, if you haven't already checked it out, is available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also head over to my website, happieratwork.ie, and all of the past podcasts are available to listen through there. So thank you so much for tuning in today. Aden, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to the conversation today?
Well, I just thought I would mention that I'm gearing up to launch season 2 of the Changed podcast, as Aoife knows, because I invited her to have a conversation. I enjoyed our conversation on your show so much. I was like, we got to keep this going. But the format is very different for my show. The focus is on this question of what does it mean to change, to be changed, to spark change in others. And what I ask my guests to do is share their thoughts and philosophy on that from all walks of life. So I've interviewed coaches, dancers, scientists, actors, authors, anyone I can think of. I try and health practitioners, like whatever. I try and bring them in, and I ask them to tell a story from a fork in the road moment in their life after which things changed for them, so that we can think about what does that lens of change do to the rest of our experience. Once we've experienced something that shifts our perspective, what does that do for us? And can we imagine what it would be like without that? So season 2 will be launching this spring, which is just around the corner. It's technically now, but it's not launching now. It's launching maybe at the end of the month, or early April. So keep your eyes peeled so that you can hear the lovely host of Happier at Work podcast in a completely different context.
Well, this is it. Yeah. I mean, very different, very open. Tune in to find out the change story that I shared and that impacted on my life. So absolutely, I'm looking forward to listening to season 2 as well.
It's going to be great. And all of season 1 is available literally everywhere. But if you want to learn more about the show, you can always visit thechangedpodcast.com. And I'll put a link in the live feed. I'll put a link in the comments section so that if you're interested in those free workshops, you can just go and check those out.
Excellent. Yeah, I definitely must check out one of those workshops myself. They sound really, really interesting. So thank you so much. Thank you for making it free and available. Or if free is too expensive, there's other places that people can go. And if you could put the link to that in the comments as well, that would be excellent. The Medium article.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely can do that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing this live with me today. And if anyone has any questions or comments, we will be here. We'll be responding to any comments that come through on the video. So thank you so much for your time today. And thanks everyone for tuning in.